customers like myself, you don't pour yourself in these little cars anymore.
Right.
Or if you got in a family, if it had Cayenne, when I had 4 kids, I'd have had a Cayenne.
Sure. Oh, sure.
They filled the market there.
So what have we not covered that we should talk about?
Okay, the very first meeting
Right?
of the Milwaukee-Chicago group, we didn't mention it.
Okay.
But that was really the beginning of the Milwaukee region. Is when, everyone I could figure out, let them know we're gonna meet. We met in a tavern on Highway 41. It's still there. It's on the east side of the street outside of Kenosha.
Just over the state line.
It's on this side of the state line. Oh, yeah, that's not where it was. And I remember meeting there. I remember the program, because I'd come back from Sebring, and I had the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you got your ticket for going 100 miles an hour in a Volkswagen.
I'm proud of that. You have to find a big hill.
But that was a program for the guys that couldn't go down to Sebring. We had those pictures. And my main memory is I had all the equipment, I had to put it back in the car. And I walked out on the porch and I looked, and here are all these 356s. Must have been about 35 of them. But that was the first meeting of the Milwaukee-Chicago group.
Okay.
And after that, I moved on down to Phoenix, started a
Right.
region down there.
Right?
But the thing, they never expected it that meeting, how big this would get.
Right.
We never envisioned there'd be enough cars in Milwaukee.
The next step after that was that we formed our own region
Right.
with these 12 people that are on the charter, as you
Mhm.
remember. And I remember sitting on Ray Royce's hearth in front of the fireplace because he didn't have enough chairs to see all of us 12 people in his living room. So a bunch of people were sitting on the hearth as a seat, in front of his fireplace, and he had right across from Wisconsin, the cemetery, what's that called?
Forest
On
Lawn.
Capitol Drive.
Oh, on Capitol Drive.
The cemetery in
The
Capitol
Valley
Drive.
Level?
Wisconsin Memorial.
Yeah, Wisconsin
Wisconsin
Memorial.
Memorial Park. His house was right across the street from Wisconsin Memorial Park. And we all sat there and signed the charter.
Okay.
Mike Claypool was the instigator.
Right?
He collected us all up, and Ray Royce was gracious enough, he's an architect, as I recall, and he was gracious enough to invite us to his house for the very first meeting of the Milwaukee region, so that we could all
Sign.
put our John Henry on the
Sure,
signature.
sure.
And that was it happening. We just got it all, got the
All put
thing
together.
started, and off the road. And so.
So I would assume there was a lot of excitement that Milwaukee could organize its own club, obtain its own charter, and sort of build.
And Bob had access to some, we had a lot of the first meetings in Capitol Court, as I recall, the organizational meetings.
Yeah.
We would meet because he was president of Capitol Court at the time.
Assistant general manager.
Assistant general manager,
Okay,
whatever that
okay.
is. And so he had access to meeting rooms and so on. And then subsequently used Capitol Court for our first gym conference,
Okay,
speaking
okay.
events and like that, and kind of general meeting places, because he had access to a facility that is suitable for holding meetings and things like that. So, how long were you the president? I think maybe 3 years or something.
Maybe something like that. Then I had to,
Your job took you to Chicago. or
Chicago.
something. Yeah.
Okay.
I became president of the Chicago region.
Oh, you did after
After a year
Okay.
down there.
Okay.
When I moved to California, I joined the San Francisco
Okay.
ACA. But back in Chicago, we did quite a bit of work and had Meadowdale, Wilmot, and you remember a bunch of those things.
I can't remember the sequence of events, but perhaps Bob Chasseau was the president after you, and then I was the president
Right.
Bob Schussel.
Yes.
And
And we actually,
Bob Jenkins went on to be the next president and
we actually have,
chronology.
we have that chronology as part of the club archives.
Sure.
Yeah,
And when Bob Jenkins he was the performance guy, he liked speed events.
right.
That's the year that when he was president, that we did three events at Glendale Farms. Speed events.
So a lot has been accomplished, and you've contributed significantly to that. You know, clearly, there's a debt of gratitude for your early involvement. I've got to believe you look back on it and sort of feel a sense of pride in all of that early stuff that you really never thought would sort of become what it is today. I would assume that.
We had no intention of it growing.
But
Most of us just having a good time.
it was just the camaraderie
That's right.
and sharing
It grew
knowledge.
beyond, way beyond us.
Yeah,
And speaking of that, we just love sharing those memories with
Yes.
other people who are
Yes.
interested in having those
I know.
memories shared.
and obviously, we're here to sort of capture those memories and capture that history.
One of the unique things as I was phasing out of the Porsche business, because I was specializing in repairing Porsches, I had an event for the club, which was a social event of types.
Mhm.
I had a lot of parts and things from Porsche, and because the BMW was squeezing me out of the Porsche business,
Mhm.
and there were already Porsche dealers, and I didn't have access to wholesale parts for Porsche. And although I started with Porsche, I just decided this is going to be a time when I'm going to have to, with tear and eye,
You're gonna have to part ways.
part with doing Porsche,
Right.
because my BMW customers had to be first, because I had
Sure.
a franchise for that product. So I gathered up all the things that I had from Porsche and put them on display at my little repair shop on the south side. And we auctioned off all of those parts that were left. Or was that dumb or what? That I had left over, some were used and whatever.
Right, and wouldn't you still like to have this
Yeah,
in storage?
And so what happened is, I donated all of that money to the treasury of the Porsche Club.
Okay.
Forgot for those parts. And
Okay.
we had so much fun auctioning. Were you at that auction? I know John Heaton was there, and Jerry Mansell were there, and they were telling stories about embellishing what these parts were from, you know? And it was getting really nuts, because Jerry Mansell was saying that dipstick that I had there, that he was auctioning off, was the one that I had in my Porsche when I set the track record in production at Road America. Oh, this is just really stretching it. Guess who the high bidder was on that dipstick? Was my wife.
Are you serious?
She bought the Kool-Aid that really wasn't my She wanted it so bad. So then when I finally had to reveal to her that really wasn't from that Porsche Speedster at all, she mounted it onto a piece of wood and gave it to John Heaton as a present, because he was trying to bid against her, and he really wanted that dipstick. And so we bought it onto a piece of wood, you know, and he had that in his office, on his door in his office for years and years and years, and that was kind of just a funny story that I think I have to tell, because it's just something nifty that came about. Because,
You know, I also remember the story, Hal, that you shared with me when, I think it was Fred Stratton had his Porsche. He was a college student. He was in Madison, I think, at the time. And he was heading back to school, and it began to snow. And I think he called you because he was afraid to drive his Carrera.
There's two stories confused here.
Okay.
There was a story about Fred Stratton, but this one that I think you're talking about, but trying to get the 356 back to Madison.
Yeah.
Was a college student,
Right?
and his name was Nick Siegel, and he was a district attorney from City of Milwaukee.
Okay.
He was going to law school at the time at UW, and he bought this Porsche, and he started going to Madison, and the roads were really slippery. He said, "I'm going to crash this car before I get to Madison." So he came back with the car, and he says, "I really like the car, but can somebody drive it to Madison for me?" So sure enough, I had to drive the car all the way to Madison, and he put me on the bus and sent me back home. That was my first experience, you know, and of course, only times that I ever drove a Porsche, because I didn't own one at the time. That was like a 1953 or 54 Porsche. I didn't own one at the time myself, and of course, I had, you know, like instant get used to driving this Porsche on a slippery road type thing, you know. And so that was kind of an interesting experience. And obviously, I mastered it enough that I was so intrigued with the way they handled that I just had to have one as soon as I could, you know.
That's funny.
And
But what about the Fred Stratton?
the Fred Stratton story was a little different. It was, he was having trouble driving in a dry pavement. And
That is different.
he had a Carrera.
Yeah, he still has that.
Yes. And he was not getting used to when he put the power on what would happen with the Carrera. And I said, you know, what he was doing is braking real late into a corner and trying to go around a corner.
And then getting heavy on the throttle.
Yeah, and you don't do that with a Porsche because you need to settle the car down first to get your actual squat, and then you go around the corner. And I took him down to the ballpark because he said, "I keep spinning out with this car all the time." He says, "I can't even drive it in the rain because, you know, Carreras had heavy engines and not that good." And so I said, "Can somebody teach me how to drive this thing?" You know? So we had a little driving school all by ourselves at the stadium going through the S's, you know.
That's good.
Yeah.
So a lot of great experience. Any other thoughts or questions?
With Renee here being the first and only so far female president, obviously you mentioned your wife, and I'm sure that there were girlfriends of members as well. Were there any early women Porsche owners in the club?
Ruth Levy, but she was not a.
That was the national, you know.
Yeah.
There were a lot of women that went on the trekking with Jerry and I to pick up their Porsches. And so there were women that were in the Porsche Club, but not in the Milwaukee region. Oh, yes, Sally Heater, her name was Sally Heater. She was the bookkeeper at Elio's Restaurant in Blue Mountain. And she owned a Porsche coupe. She later moved up to Little Chute. And she'd come out to all the parades, the Jug-In Barn and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, Sally. Oh, and then there was a tall nurse that worked at County Hospital.
Okay, so now these are
O'Connell.
beginning to come back.
Yeah, her name was O'Connell, and it was really interesting. She took an overseas delivery of a Porsche coupe,
Okay.
and she studied the gear ratios, because they gave you the option of any gear ratios. Well, she ordered that car with hill climbing gears in it for some reason. And turns out that eventually Jim Baldwin, I don't know if you know who Jim Baldwin is, you know, of course. He was a Porsche Club member. He bought that car, and he'd go down to the drag races in Old
Yeah,
Grove
sure.
and wipe everybody out because that car was so quick, up to 80 miles an hour.
That was it.
It was over red by that time.
What kind of car did your now wife drive when she first met you?
Well, how I met my wife is she came into Baumgarten Motors
Okay.
in 1959, Super Coupe. And she was 21 years